There are moments in life when the weight on your chest feels heavier than anything you have ever carried. When the world grows quiet, not because it is peaceful, but because your heart is too tired to beat loudly anymore. You sit in the dim light of your room, trying to breathe through the ache you cannot name, trying to steady hands that tremble from battles no one else sees. And in that silence, a truth you have avoided for so long finally rises to the surface. You are not as strong as you pretend to be. You have spent years holding yourself together, convincing others and convincing yourself that you could endure anything, outlast any storm, stand tall through every heartache. But tonight, your strength feels like a thin thread stretched too far, fraying under the weight of everything you've tried to carry alone. Pain has a way of stripping away pretenses. It exposes the truth beneath the masks we wear, the truth we hope no one ever notices. Even the bravest hearts have moments when they collapse. Even the strongest souls feel lost. Even the ones who carry others sometimes cannot lift themselves. And it's in those quiet, fragile moments that a whisper rises from a place deeper than fear, deeper than exhaustion, deeper even than hope. A whisper you weren't planning to say, but somehow escapes your soul. Lord, I am weak. Please lift me up. It is not a dramatic prayer. It is not a polished, rehearsed sentence. It is simply the sound of a weary spirit reaching out towards something greater than itself. And in that moment, you realize that your weakness is not a failure. It is an invitation. Because the place where your strength ends is the place where God's presence begins. You feel it not as thunder, not as a miracle breaking open the sky, but as a quiet warmth settling into the deepest part of your being, a stillness that says, you are not alone. You were never alone. For the first time in a long time, you stopped trying to hold everything together. You stopped fighting the storm with your bare hands. You let yourself crumble, but not into despair. You crumble into God's arms. And as the tears fall, not in panic, but in release, something shifts inside you. You begin to see that the moments you call weakness are often the very moments when God comes closest. Not because He wants you to suffer, but because He knows that a heart emptied of its own strength finally has room for His. So you whisper again, more softly this time, not from desperation, but from surrender. Lord, if I cannot walk, please hold me. If I cannot stand, please lift me. If I cannot carry this, please carry me. And somehow, He will. Chapter 1, when my strength is no longer enough. There comes a point in every journey where the body is present, but the spirit is worn thin. You wake up in the morning and feel the heaviness before your feet even touch the floor, a quiet dread that whispers, I don't know if I can do this again today. You move through the motions, smiling when expected, working when needed, giving more of yourself than you truly have, yet inside, something is slowly unraveling. You begin to sense it first in the smallest details, the sighs you hide, the tears that sting but never fall, the way your mind drifts even in conversations because a deeper battle is happening beneath the surface. The world sees your strength, but God sees your strain. And though you try so hard to appear composed, the truth is that exhaustion has been living inside you for far too long. You tell yourself you should be stronger. You tell yourself others have carried more. You repeat the same phrases you've used to push yourself forward for years. I'll be fine. It's not that bad. I can handle it. But your heart knows you're reaching the limit of what human strength can endure. You feel like a traveler climbing a mountain with a backpack full of stones, responsibilities, expectations, disappointments, fears. At first, you carry it well, even proudly. But over time, each stone digs deeper into your shoulders, and what once felt manageable now feels unbearable. And the worst part is that you think you must keep climbing alone. That asking for help is a sign of defeat, that collapsing is weakness, that slowing down means you have failed. Yet this is the lie that wears you down the most, because human beings were never meant to carry life without grace. The weight you feel is not a punishment, it is a message that your strength was never meant to replace God's, only to guide you until you reach the moment where you needed Him more than ever. Sometimes God allows you to reach the end of yourself so you can finally see that the power you relied on was never enough to sustain your soul. Sometimes He lets the noise around you fall silent so you can hear the truth your heart has been avoiding. You are tired. You are hurting, and you need Him. This realization does not come like lightning. It comes slowly, gently, like a soft crack in a wall you thought was unbreakable. It comes when you sit alone and whisper, I can't keep doing this by myself. It comes when your hands tremble and your knees weaken, not from physical exertion, but from the emotional weight you've carried for too many seasons. It comes when you realize that the strength you once depended on no longer answers you. And that is when something sacred begins to happen. When your strength ends, God's compassion begins. You start to feel it in the spaces where you once felt only fear. Not a sudden surge of energy, not a miraculous escape, but a quiet reassurance. You don't have to do this alone. This is the moment when your human limits are not a curse but a doorway. Your weakness becomes the point of connection, the place where heaven bends low to meet the trembling earth of your soul. You begin to see that God does not wait for you to be strong. He meets you in the exact moment you fall apart. He does not ask you to lift the weight again. He asks you to let him lift you. And for the first time in a long time, you feel permission to breathe, permission to rest. Permission to admit that you're tired, not because you lack faith, but because you've fought too long without letting him fight with you. You realize that God is not disappointed in your weakness. He is drawn to it. The broken places in your heart are not places of shame, but places where he pours the most grace. And as this truth settles into you, something inside begins to loosen. The tension, the fear, the pressure to be everything for everyone. You finally understand you are allowed to lean on him. You are allowed to collapse into his arms. You are allowed to stop pretending you're fine, because God does not love the version of you who stays strong. He loves the version of you who trusts him enough to be weak. And in that truth, a new kind of strength begins, one not built by your hands, but lifted gently by his. Chapter 2, the prayer that rises from the valley. There is a moment in every season of struggle when silence becomes heavier than pain itself. You sit with your thoughts long enough to realize that you are no longer fighting the world, you are fighting the weight within your own soul. And when the pressure grows too great to carry, something inside you finally breaks open, not in defeat, but in surrender. It is here, in the quiet valley of your exhaustion, that your first real prayer begins. Not the kind spoken out of habit, not the carefully chosen words you've said in brighter days, but a raw, trembling whisper drawn from the very bottom of your spirit. Lord, I can't do this alone. Please hear me. It is strange how honest your heart becomes when everything else has been stripped away. When you have no energy left to pretend, no strength left to perform resilience, no pride left to protect you from vulnerability. In that space, prayer stops being a ritual and becomes a lifeline. You are no longer trying to impress God with eloquence. You are simply reaching out, hoping desperately that his hand is closer than you think. And the beautiful mystery is this: God does not wait for perfect prayers. He listens to the broken ones first, the ones soaked in fear, the ones whispered through tears, the ones spoken after midnight when the world sleeps but your heart cannot. In the valley of weakness, your voice may sound shaky, but to him it is a song of trust. You may think your faith is small, but to him it is a seed strong enough to split mountains. Because prayer is not about the size of your strength, it is about the direction of your surrender. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, your surrender is turning toward him. As you speak, something begins to shift, quietly, tenderly, not around you, but within you. The storm does not end, but you feel the faintest warmth like a candle flickering in the dark, not loud, not overwhelming, but unmistakably there. God's presence does not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it enters as a breath. A soft reassurance settling over your spirit like a gentle hand placed on your back. You cannot explain it, yet you know it. He heard you. And that knowing does something powerful. It loosens the fear that has gripped your chest for days, months, or even years. You feel yourself breathing deeper, as if your lungs finally remember how to hold air without shaking. You feel your thoughts slowing down, no longer racing in every direction. You feel, for the first time in a long time, that maybe, just maybe, you are safe. But prayer is not only a moment of comfort, it is also a mirror. It shows you the truth you could not see when you were too busy surviving. You have been carrying far more than your heart was ever designed to hold. You realize that the strength you demanded from yourself was unrealistic, even unkind. You pushed through wounds without healing them. You silenced emotions that were begging to be acknowledged. You wore a brave face not because you were strong, but because you were scared of falling apart. Yet falling apart in front of God is not a collapse, it is a returning to the truth that he never asked you to be unbreakable, a returning to the reality that he already knew you were tired, a returning to the love that embraces you not despite your weakness, but because of it. As your prayer deepens, your tears begin to fall not from despair, but from release. You are no longer trying to hold yourself together, you are allowing God to hold you instead. And that shift changes everything. Suddenly the valley does not feel like a place of abandonment, but a place of meeting, a sacred space where heaven leans close to earth, a quiet chamber where your vulnerability becomes the gateway to his strength. You start to feel gratitude rising within you, not for the struggle, but for the certainty that you are no longer facing it alone. Lord, you whisper again, softer, steadier. If this valley is where you meet me, then let this valley be holy. And in that moment, a peace settles over you. Not a peace that removes the storm, but a peace that tells you the storm cannot remove him. You close your eyes, breathe deeply, and feel the truth wrapping around your soul like a warm blanket. Prayer has not changed your circumstances yet, but it has changed you. And in God's timing, that is where miracles begin. Chapter 3, God takes hold of the trembling hand. There is a moment in every sincere prayer when something shifts, not outside you, but within the fragile space where fear and hope intertwine. It begins quietly, often so subtly that you almost miss it. One breath feels steadier than the last. One thought grows softer, no longer echoing with panic. One heartbeat slows, as if it finally remembers that it does not have to race through life without comfort. This is the moment when God reaches for your trembling hand, not to pull you out with force, not to scold you for falling, but to steady you with the gentleness of a father who has been waiting for you to stop running on your own strength. His touch is not loud. It does not arrive with fanfare or lightning. It comes as a quiet reassurance that settles into the deepest part of you. I am here. You may not see angels. You may not feel a miracle. But something inside your soul opens like a window you forgot existed, letting in the first breath of peace you've tasted in months. For the first time, you stop bracing for impact. You stop expecting the world to fall apart in your hands. You stop believing that everything depends on your own power. Because in that sacred exchange between your whispered prayer and God's silent response, a new truth begins to bloom. You are being held, not because you earned it, not because you prayed perfectly, but simply because God loves you with a love that rushes to the weak before it celebrates the strong. And slowly, you begin to feel it in the way your shoulders relax after years of tightening, in the way your thoughts untangle one knot at a time, in the way your breath reaches deeper places in your chest, as if air itself has become a form of grace. God is not lifting your burdens all at once. He is lifting you. It is here that the relationship becomes intimate, where your wounds speak and his patience listens. You tell him about the hurt you buried, the disappointments you never admitted, the fears you were ashamed to voice even to yourself. And somehow, speaking them does not make you weaker, it makes you lighter. You realize that God is not uncomfortable with your honesty. He does not pull back from your pain. He leans closer. He gathers the pieces you thought were too broken and holds them as if they were precious, because to him they are. Every crack in your heart is a place where his healing can enter. Every tear is a prayer in a language only he fully understands. Every weakness is an opening through which his strength can pour until it becomes your own. And as he steadies your trembling hand, a deeper revelation begins to take shape. God did not appear because you became strong. He appeared because you finally stopped pretending that you were. That realization softens something inside you, something you have guarded for far too long. The hardness you built around your heart begins to melt. The walls you raised out of fear begin to loosen. The loneliness that followed you like a shadow begins to dissolve under the warmth of his presence. You start to sense that even if the path ahead remains uncertain, you are no longer walking it alone. And somehow, that alone makes it bearable. As this truth grows inside you, gratitude begins to rise, not loud, not forced, but steady like a quiet flame. You begin to see small signs of his hand everywhere, in moments of unexpected clarity, in a conversation that brings comfort, in a stillness that feels like a gift from heaven itself. You start to understand that God's help does not always arrive as rescue. Sometimes it arrives as reassurance. Sometimes he does not remove the valley, he walks you through it. Sometimes he does not silence the storm. He anchors your heart so deeply in his presence that the wind loses its power to shake you. And in that anchoring, something beautiful happens. You stop trembling, not because life is easier, but because your spirit is steadier. God's hand holding yours has become the one constant you can rely on. And even in your weakness, you begin to feel strong again, not with human strength, but with the quiet, unwavering strength that comes from knowing you are truly, deeply, eternally held. Chapter 4, learning to walk again on the legs of faith. When God takes hold of your trembling hand, he does not simply lift you to your feet and then step away. He stays steady and patient, guiding you as you learn to walk again, not by your old strength, but by a strength rooted in him. At first, the steps feel unfamiliar. After all, you have spent so long surviving on adrenaline, fear, and sheer willpower that walking with peace feels almost strange, as if you are relearning a forgotten language. You take one step, and doubts whisper, what if you fall again? You take another, and memories of past failures try to drag you backward. But God walks beside you, not pushing, not rushing, simply matching his pace to your trembling courage. And slowly, the ground beneath you begins to feel less threatening. It is in this gentle season that God teaches you what human strength never could. Resilience does not come from gritting your teeth. It comes from trusting his presence. Each day becomes a small lesson, a moment where you choose faith over fear, a choice to breathe instead of drown in your thoughts, a decision to trust that God's hand is still there even when you cannot feel it. And in these smaller, quieter victories, your heart begins to heal. You start to see that God's guidance is not always dramatic. Sometimes it shows up as a verse that speaks too directly to your pain to be coincidence. Sometimes it appears as a conversation with someone who says exactly what your spirit needed to hear. Sometimes it comes as an inner nudge that whispers, rest, let me carry this one. Walking with faith is not about ignoring reality. It is about seeing reality through the eyes of a God who never leaves. You begin to understand that strength is not the absence of weakness. It is the ability to stand even while weakness remains, because God is holding you upright. In time, you start noticing changes within yourself. The things that used to overwhelm you no longer shatter you. The fears that once controlled your decisions begin to lose their grip. The wounds that felt too deep to ever heal start closing, not because you forced them to, but because God has been stitching them together quietly from the inside out. Through these changes, you learn a truth that transforms everything. Faith is not a single moment of surrender, but a daily act of walking with God, even when the path is unclear. And as you practice this walk, something remarkable happens. Your steps grow stronger. You begin to look ahead instead of constantly glancing back. You feel hope rising like a morning sun after a long night. You trust more, not because life is easier, but because your heart finally understands who walks beside you. God begins to teach you lessons you were too exhausted to learn before. He teaches you patience not as waiting for things to change, but as resting in his timing. He teaches you forgiveness not as excusing what hurt you, but as freeing your soul from what chains you. He teaches you boundaries not as walls of fear, but as sacred lines protecting your peace. He teaches you love, not the kind you used to beg for, but the kind that flows from a healed and steady heart. And in these lessons, you start to see glimpses of the person you are becoming. Not the exhausted version of yourself who fought alone for so long, not the fearful version who hid pain behind silence, but the renewed version, steadier, gentler, wiser, anchored in something eternal. You begin to understand that faith is not a crutch, it is a compass. It is not weakness, it is direction. It does not make life perfect, it makes life possible. And slowly, with every step taken beside God, you feel your soul learning something it had forgotten. You were never meant to walk alone. As this truth takes root, your steps grow firmer. You no longer walk with the shaky uncertainty of someone barely surviving, but with the quiet confidence of someone being guided, supported, and deeply loved. And though the path ahead may still twist and turn, your heart knows this now with unshakable clarity. If God is walking with you, then every step forward, no matter how small, is already a victory. Chapter 5, God uses your weakness to build a stronger you. As you continue walking with God, something unexpected begins to unfold, not in a sudden revelation, but in a quiet transformation that slowly reshapes who you are. The very weaknesses that once frightened you become the places where God plants new strength. The wounds that once bled with shame begin to shine with wisdom. The struggles that once broke you now become the soil where resilience grows. You start to see that God was never trying to make you invincible. He was shaping you into someone unshakable. There is a difference. Invincibility demands perfection. Unshakability is forged through grace. Invincibility hides weakness. Unshakability embraces it and lets God rebuild it. And so as your journey deepens, you begin to understand a divine truth. God does not waste pain. Every tear you shed has watered a seed. Every disappointment has carved space for greater clarity. Every broken moment has opened a doorway for him to enter. You look back at seasons where you felt shattered, moments when life stripped you bare, when hope felt distant, when you believed you had nothing left to offer. And now, standing in this new light, you begin to see what God saw all along. Those very moments were the foundation of your becoming. For in every broken piece, there was room for his healing touch. In every empty space, there was room for his presence. In every weakness, there was room for his strength to take root. Slowly, you begin to feel the fruit of this transformation. You react differently to challenges, not with the panic of someone overwhelmed, but with the calm of someone anchored. You forgive more easily, not because the hurt disappears, but because your heart has learned that forgiveness frees you first. You show compassion not from obligation, but from understanding, because you once walked with heavy burdens too. You speak more gently to yourself, realizing that God never used harshness to heal you. He used tenderness. Perhaps most beautifully, you stop seeing your weakness as a flaw. You begin to see it as a meeting place where heaven touched earth, where God touched you. And when you think back on the moments you cried out for help, they no longer fill you with shame. They fill you with gratitude, because it was in those moments that God shaped your soul, not through power, but through presence, not through pressure, but through patience, not through expectation, but through love. And in this divine refashioning, you learn one of the greatest paradoxes of faith. Your life's deepest valleys often reveal your life's highest purposes. You begin to see that the empathy you carry now is richer, deeper, more tender, because you have walked through darkness and found God there. The boundaries you uphold now are stronger, not because you fear being hurt, but because you finally know your worth. Your discernment is sharper, not because you mistrust the world, but because God has taught you to hear his whisper beneath the noise. Your courage is steadier, not because you are fearless, but because you know who walks beside you. And with each day, the person you are becoming reflects more of the person God always knew you could be. Not perfect, not untouchable, but whole, grounded, resilient, radiant with the quiet strength that only those touched by grace can carry. You realize now that God's goal was never to make you stronger by avoiding weakness. His goal was to make you stronger through it. Because a tree that grows in storms grows deeper roots. A heart that is healed from breaking carries deeper love. A soul lifted by God himself carries a strength nothing in the world can erase. And so you stand here not as the person who once begged for survival, but as someone who has learned to rise, not because life became easier, but because God rebuilt you from the inside out. And as this truth settles into your spirit, a quiet confidence fills you. A confidence not based on your abilities, but on God's faithfulness. You whisper softly, "Lord, thank you for using what hurt me to transform me." And in the gentle light of this new chapter, you finally understand your weakness was never your downfall. It was the doorway through which God shaped you into someone stronger, softer, wiser, and beautifully whole. Chapter 6, when peace returns and settles into your soul. There comes a point in every journey with God when you begin to feel something you once thought you had lost forever: peace. Not the fragile kind that depends on circumstances, nor the temporary kind that disappears with the next storm, but a deeper, quieter peace that grows from the inside out. A peace built not on certainty, but on trust. A peace that whispers, "You are safe, even here." It doesn't arrive suddenly. It does not crash into your life with dramatic force. Instead, it comes softly, like dawn breaking after a long night. At first, it appears in tiny moments, moments you barely notice. A breath that feels unusually calm. A thought that no longer spirals into panic. A morning where you wake up without the familiar heaviness pressing on your chest. These small moments are the first signs that your soul is healing. This peace is not a reward for enduring pain. It is the result of walking with God through it. It is what grows after you have cried out, surrendered your burdens, allowed him to hold your trembling hand, and trusted him enough to take the first steps forward again. It is what forms when you stop relying on your own strength and start living from his. You begin to feel the difference in the way you carry your days. The situations that once overwhelmed you now meet a heart that has learned to steady itself in God's presence. The voices of fear and doubt still try to rise, but they are softer now, almost powerless, because your spirit has learned a new rhythm, one shaped not by anxiety, but by grace. You start to see the world differently. What once looked like chaos now feels manageable. What once felt like a dead end now feels like a detour with purpose. Even the unanswered questions that used to torment you no longer demand immediate resolution. Somehow, you trust that God is working in ways you cannot yet see. And as peace grows, gratitude follows. You find yourself thanking God for things you once resented, hard lessons, closed doors, painful goodbyes. Not because the pain was good, but because his presence within it transformed you. You no longer see your wounds as proof of weakness, but as evidence of his nearness. You no longer see your valleys as signs of abandonment, but as sacred places where he met you most intimately. This shift does not make life perfect. It makes life bearable in a new, holy way. The storms may still come, but they no longer terrify you. The shadows may still appear, but they no longer define you. The challenges may still rise, but you no longer face them trembling, you face them anchored. You begin to understand the true meaning of peace. It is not the absence of storms, but the presence of God within them. It is not the silence of trouble, but the stillness of knowing you are held. It is not that the world becomes gentle, but that your soul becomes grounded, and this grounding spreads through every part of your life. In conversations, you respond with a calm that surprises even you. In decisions, you pause long enough to listen for God's whisper. In relationships, you show grace without losing your boundaries. In solitude, you no longer feel abandoned, you feel accompanied. Perhaps the most profound change is this: you stop rushing. You stop forcing outcomes. You stop trying to control what was never yours to control. Instead, you move with a quiet assurance that God's timing is not late, His plans are not fragile, and His love is not conditional. Your heart settles into the truth that once felt distant. You don't have to know everything to be at peace. You just have to know that God is with you. And because of that, you finally breathe easily again. This is the peace that returns after the breaking. This is the peace born from surrender. This is the peace shaped in the valley but carried onto the mountaintop. And as it fills you, you realize something beautiful. You are no longer merely surviving, you are becoming whole. You whisper softly into this new stillness, Lord, thank you for giving me a peace the world could never give. And in that whisper, your soul settles, finally, fully, gently, into rest. As you stand now at the end of this journey, no longer in the place where you first cried out, no longer trembling under the weight you once carried, you can finally look back with new eyes. The valley that once felt endless now appears as a sacred passage. The darkness that once frightened you now glows faintly with the traces of God's footsteps beside your own. You realize that the miracle was not that the storm vanished, but that you were never abandoned inside it. You are not the same person who fell to their knees asking, Lord, I am weak, please lift me up. You are someone deeper, steadier, more alive. Weakness did not destroy you, it revealed you. Pain did not end you, it transformed you. And God quietly, patiently, faithfully carried you through every hidden corner of your suffering until strength grew where fear once lived. Now, when you breathe, the air feels lighter. When you walk, your steps feel anchored. When you think of the future, you no longer brace for disaster, you wait with trust. Because you have learned the greatest truth a weary heart can ever learn. God's presence is not a distant comfort, it is the very ground beneath your feet. You carry scars, yes, but they are no longer symbols of defeat. They are stories, holy stories of how God entered your wounds and rebuilt you from the inside out. They are reminders that broken things are not worthless in God's hands. They are precisely where His glory chooses to dwell. And as you look forward now, you do so with a peace that does not depend on circumstances. You know, storms may come again. Life will still surprise you. Valleys will still appear on the horizon. But you carry something now that you did not have before. The memory of being lifted. The memory of being held. The memory of God coming closer when everything felt impossible. This memory becomes your strength. It becomes the anchor you return to when shadows creep in. It becomes the whisper you follow when doubt rises. It becomes the courage you draw from when the world feels heavy again. You will not walk alone because you never truly did. So you lift your eyes, breathe deeply, and whisper one final prayer, not from desperation, but from gratitude. Lord, thank you for meeting me in my weakness. Thank you for lifting me when I could not lift myself. Thank you for staying when everything else fell apart. And thank you for turning my trembling steps into a walk of faith. And with that, your heart settles into a truth that will carry you for the rest of your life. When you are weak, God does not simply give you strength. He becomes your strength. And in His strength, you will rise again and again and again. You stop trying to control what was never yours to control. Instead, you move with a quiet assurance that God's timing is not late, His plans are not fragile, and His love is not conditional. Your heart settles into the truth that once felt distant. You don't have to know everything to be at peace. You just have to know that God is with you. And because of that, you finally breathe easily again. This is the peace that returns after the breaking. This is the peace born from surrender. This is the peace shaped in the valley but carried onto the mountaintop. And as it fills you, you realize something beautiful. You are no longer merely surviving. You are becoming whole. You whisper softly into this new stillness, Lord, thank you for giving me a peace the world could never give. And in that whisper, your soul settles, finally, fully, gently into rest.